So, welcome to episode 8 of On Air with Phoenician Hunter and Tesla 369, titled The Hidden Hand. This is another article, another very well researched and written article by Phoenician Hunter, which looks at the City of London Corporation and its dominance over global financial markets for at least the last 2,000 years. So, welcome, Phoenician Hunter.
Hello, we're back for another interesting discussion,
This is going to
hopefully.
be very interesting because I think the City of London is, again, one of those topics that a lot of people, and you don't have to be a so called conspiracy theorist to know this, but this is something that I'm eager to learn more
Yeah,
on. So, look, I'll throw it over to you. As I said, we'll get straight off the bat. This is going to be a very, very interesting and an insightful discussion. So,
yeah.
without further ado, over to you, Phoenician Hunter.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that most people know about the City of London Corporation, but unfortunately, most of them get it wrong because they just repeat stuff they've heard without doing any research. Okay, you got this three city states in the world, the Vatican, they say, City of London and Washington, D.C., right?
Mm, mm.
But that's it. They leave it at that, and then there's nothing else. So I wanted to actually look into it and who's behind this City of London and how is it connected to the other two. This is almost a part two to the Pilgrims article that I wrote, and we did a podcast on the Pilgrims a while back.
The Pilgrim Society, that's right. Which
That's right.
our audience can either go to your Substack to read the article or go to the Tesla 369 YouTube channel to actually listen to that podcast.
Yeah. So when researching that, I just came across a lot of information that led me to write this second article here that we're discussing today. So, the Pilgrims, they say, were centered in the City of London, like most of these organizations are. And then that led me to further research into the City of London Corporation and what is it and when did it start, and really goes all the way back to Rome and Britain, this connections there with the Roman Empire. But what I found is that this City of London Corporation, it always had its own rights and privileges that were outside of the kings and monarchs of
Mm,
England,
mm,
right? They had that as special status. They were allowed to do things that other communities, other towns, other cities in Britain were not allowed. They had this special privilege that they call it. I think they called it like their ancient rights granted to them and ancient liberties, they called them, and
mm,
customs,
mm, mm.
right? But I found that the monarchs allowed them to keep these privileges as long as they were sort of given some kind of tribute. So money, basically, almost like the monarchs were paid off to allow this corporation to keep functioning.
Can I
Yeah.
interject there and ask, from a historical perspective, was this from way back when it was known as Londinium, AD
Yeah.
43? You mentioned that the Crown had given them certain liberties and privileges. Does it date back as far as that?
It even goes further back, but I mean,
How far
I
back do
think
we
I
go? I
think it's
suppose you're right.
connected to the Roman Empire, probably established because see, the Roman Empire had a lot of these, which we're going to get into, trade guilds, and that's what makes up the City of London Corporation. They're basically what they term guilds and livery companies,
Mm.
which are associations of trades, basically, crafts and trades. They
But
they go way back to the Roman Empire, and if you want to even go further back than that, but
Well, I was trying to keep it within, I guess,
yeah,
let's call it the United Kingdom. So, well, the
yeah.
point I was trying to make, that was a good reference, a historical reference point for me, is that you mentioned Londinium, you mentioned the Battle of Hastings, you mentioned the Magna Carta, which to me are three pivotal points in history. Is that something you want to talk about, or
Oh, no, that was sort of just to set the scene and give it some
Yeah,
background for people who wanted to maybe research that area further.
okay,
So no, let's bring it more to the current era,
current day,
right?
okay, great.
Yeah, a lot of this information I got from reading the book, The Empire of the City: The Secret History of British Financial Power
Mm,
by E.C. Nuff. And
that's right.
he mentioned that the city and not the monarch and not the crown were the actual true rulers of the British Empire. He suggested that that's the power was in the city, not in the king, not in the monarch, right?
Right, right.
Which other researchers have noticed as well, but I think he was one of the first, 1944.
Okay.
So, he's been saying that for quite a while. Okay, so then who's the City of London Corporation? And then you look behind that. And then what I found was that this City of London Corporation was made up of other smaller companies. And these were called the guilds and livery companies of the City of London.
Okay. So
Okay.
tell us a little bit more about that.
Going back to in the Empire of the City book, he mentions that this corporation, the City of London Corporation, this is what he says. He says its voting power. So the people who vote for the city mayor, for example, and the administration, the people who run the City of London Corporation, he says its voting power is vested in secret guilds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes on to mention some of these guilds, right? What these trade guilds are, and like I said earlier, they've been around for over 1,000 years. The guilds and livery companies that make up the City of London are associations of crafts. So, for example, you've got merciers, drapers, fishmongers, goldsmiths, ironmongers, cloth workers. They made up the trades of that era. And in order to trade, right, or to make something, you had to have a license to make and sell your things, your wares.
Right.
So then you have to be part of an association, a guild. So this is what makes up the City of London Corporation, these guilds that have been around over 1,000 years.
And they still exist to this day.
Yeah, they still exist to this day, but they're not associated for fishmongers, they're not.
But they've probably morphed into other corporations, so to speak.
They've morphed into financial services basically today, because later they became the early bankers, basically. This is what they morphed into, that these trade guilds eventually morphed into crown bankers. Okay, so this is important, all right? These guilds are the ones that developed England as a financial powerhouse. So they're the ones who started the financial institutions, for example, okay, the Royal Exchange. So before this period, England was just a small, nothing nation. It was really these guilds and trade associations that pushed England or the British Empire onto the world scene, right? They did that by implementing financial institutions like the Royal Exchange, the Bank of England, which these institutions, they modeled off the Dutch systems that were in place a little earlier. And then they are the ones who started setting up foreign trade and exploration companies, right? So you've got the Virginia Company, the London Company, East India Company. Okay, so you want to know who's behind the East India Company? It's these people. They're the ones who started these companies. Trading companies was...
And the East India Trading Company is probably one of the better known ones.
Yeah, but there was earlier ones before that people are not aware of. The Levant Company, the Merchant Adventurers Company. These were all companies for what they call trade and exploration, but it was more, trade exploitation.
Exploitation, yes, of course.
Slavery, you name it, they were involved in it. These companies are the ones that went to foreign lands to take whatever they could, basically.
Rape and pillage, as we know.
Right. So this is the beginning of it, and it's set up by these people. And what I found also, which really explains the power that the City of London holds, is there has been monarchs in the past that have tried to stop them or tried to tax them heavily and sort of almost, take their power away. But one good example is Charles II, right?
Yeah.
What he did, and I mentioned this in the article because it's a good example of what happens, is he pretty much made them null and void. Okay, so he took their licenses away and made them dead companies. A few years later, the Glorious Revolution starts, and William of Orange is brought in to displace the king, financed through Dutch companies and the City of London Company. So these bankers now, they've become bankers, right?
So that was bye-bye Charles II.
Exactly.
So what happened to him?
What they're trying to show is that, you come after us.
Yeah.
They can take down a monarch.
Yeah. And as a result, Charles II was poisoned, from what I understand.
So, they're just showing their hand, how powerful they are. They can take down.
So that means, just to go on to that, Charles II was eventually poisoned.
Correct.
And James II, who you write, attempted to do the same thing. He was eventually deposed. Is that correct?
Correct. In the Glorious Revolution funded by the Dutch and
Right.
the City of London Corporation. So, basically they're showing that the immense power they hold, and how they can just remove a king,
Mm.
if their rights and privileges are
Threatened.
threatened.
Yeah. So what does that say about the City of London's relationship with the Crown, for example?
Well, that tells me that, and Nuff was correct in his assessment, that
Mm.
they hold the real power of the British Empire. You
Right.
know what I
Okay.
mean?
Mm.
That the king is just there almost as a figurehead.
Right. Sorry, can I just say, because again, this is common knowledge, is that the Crown needs approval to go into the City of London, or they need
Yeah,
to.
well, there is that.
That's
A lot of people.
even to this day.
Yeah, yeah, that's correct. Yeah, this was a good example that I found. Because a lot of people say, yeah, okay, like you just mentioned, that the crown or the monarch needs approval before entering the City of London.
Mm.
This explains why. This explains how much power they actually hold, and how in the past, if the king or the monarch go up against this group, in the past they've lost out. So,
Sure. To this day, are you suggesting that the Crown bow to the City of London?
well, yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I would believe that these, which have become bankers and financiers
Of
now,
course,
right?
yeah.
Because I don't want to call them, I don't want to keep calling them trade and guild companies, which
Of
sounds
course.
like, your local grandmothers, and, or your local fishmonger at the market. That's not
Of
what they are
course.
anymore,
Of course,
right?
yes.
These are powerful now. Now they're powerful financial institutions. They, at this point, well, at the point of when the king was killed, at that point they were powerful bankers. At that point, right? So
Mm.
they owned the trading companies, like I said, the Virginia Company, the East India Company.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm. Mm.
so they hold the power. They hold the purse strings at this point in time.
Right. Mm.
So just some of the things that I found when looking into the arms of the British Empire, right? So what is the British Empire? So you've got the military, you've got the Bank of England, you've got, like I said, the East India Company. These all make up the British Empire, right? So when the king wanted to colonize America, for example, this City of London group are the ones that set up the trading company, exploration company, and they're the ones who financed it. So the colonization of America was actually funded by these livery companies.
Right.
Okay. But then the king he revoked their charter at some point, and he assumed direct control of
Which king?
King James the
James,
First,
just
right?
to put a reference point in terms of the time period we're talking
Yeah,
about.
so 1623 here. Okay, just after, Jamestown was settled. So Jamestown was settled in 1607. So about, 15 years later, it's revoked. The king assumes direct control. But what I think happened in America is that there was a fight over ownership between the monarch and this city group. So what happens later is that, there's the American Revolution. So I think the American Revolution, if you look at who's behind the revolution, the East India Company is, at that point in time, is all over America, right? They're all over the American settlements there, trading. And if you look in behind the East India Company, it's all members of these livery companies. So, the people who are running the company are connected to these guilds and livery companies of the City of London. So there's no doubt in my mind who's running it.
Sure.
And that again is in the article. I supply names directly, family connections that run right through all these companies that are the British, the arms of the British Empire, all run by members of these livery companies. So it's people who are loyal, right?
Mm.
Because then that brings me on to, to be a member of these livery companies, you got to join. It's almost like how people join the Freemasons, you got to go through some kind of ritual. It's not easy to become a member. You got to hold what they call the Freedom of the City of London Award. It's almost,
A big
it's a
club and we
secret.
ain't in it.
Basically, it's a secret organization, right?
Mm.
I found that, yeah, the American Revolution, I think, is these companies getting or taking America back from
Mm.
from the monarch. because their charter was revoked. So
Right.
it's them taking it back. And when you see, the American flag, for instance, it was really the East India Company flag. Their first flag was the East India Company flag. Why would you fly that flag if you're fighting the British Empire for
Sure.
independence?
Sure.
Makes no sense to me. Yeah, the American flag, for instance, I covered that in the Pilgrims article, which is, like I said, one that sort of this one leads on from. So if people want to look into that more closely,
Mm,
uh,
mm,
I've covered that in there. So these two, articles really, work hand in hand. Yeah. So what people need to realize is that also that the East India Company, right,
mm.
at the time had its own private army, right?
Okay.
And its forces were twice the size of the British Army at the time. So you got the King's Army, the British Army, right? And then you've got the East India Company's army, which is separate. And the East India Company's is twice as large as the British Army. So if they were to go to war with each other, the East India Companies can take care of
Sure.
itself.
Sure.
So this is why there's all these indicators that point to the American Revolution really being, another researcher has termed it almost a civil war between, the British Empire. So, the monarch versus the City of London, basically. Just to elaborate on some of the points we've made earlier. So this corporation really works like a nation within a nation. Okay.
Mm.
So it used, the British Empire as just like a means to accumulate its own wealth and power. So it does not care who's the king of England, who's on the throne. It doesn't care
Right.
because it works independently of that. It holds its own power. It's almost like the Vatican, right? The Vatican
Yep.
doesn't care who the Prime Minister of Italy is. It doesn't affect it.
Of
Right?
course.
And people say the same of Washington, D.C. They say that's another, city state within America
Mm.
doing running its own business, basically. So the City of London, but it used the British and the English manpower for its own benefits, right? For its own ends. But as I said earlier, there has been, this sort of conflict between the two sometimes. They're not always on the same page, right?
Mm.
Maybe, maybe a king comes in and goes, oh, I'm not going to answer to these people. You know what I mean?
Right.
So tries to exert his power, and then he quickly finds out that that's not the way to go about it because you're going to lose your crown,
Mm.
right? So again, I touched on this, but I wanted to talk about it in more detail. Was that these trade and guild companies, after amassing a fair bit of wealth, then the king or other organizations will go to them for financial aid, for funding.
Mm.
So then this is where they morph into the financiers, right? Merchant bankers, basically. This is before there are any established banks, right?
Sure.
So you go to these people to borrow money.
Can I just ask, just for clarity purposes, these people now, are we getting into Rothschilds, or are we still looking at the guild, at a
No, the
group?
guild, a lot of them are connected through family, family connections.
Sure.
But all the names that I've come across are all Saxon, Anglo-Saxon names. They're English names, right?
Right. Yep.
I have not found any Jewish penetration of these guilds and livery companies. I haven't come across, like, for instance, the Rothschilds being a member of these, but there's evidence that he worked with them. For
Mm.
instance, with the Bank of England,
Mm.
he's working with these shareholders. So I don't know if he became a member in private. Like, I'm not sure.
The only reason I say that is because there are papers out there, or people that have spoken about the fact that a lot of the monarchies around the world are beholden to the Rothschilds because they're the ones that have lent them the money. And again, whether this is
Okay.
connected or not.
The Rothschilds came a lot. They came onto the scene a lot later.
Okay.
Talking
Okay.
about,
Okay.
you
So
know,
late 1700s, 18.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Late
Okay. Sure.
1700s,
Okay.
1800s. We're talking here,
L-
beginning
l-
from the
yeah. Late
the
1600s,
13th.
early 1700s, and
Exactly.
even yeah. Okay.
But even
Okay.
even earlier, they start around the 13th century and work. They're there from the very beginning.
Okay. So the Rothschilds is a completely separate timeline altogether, and a completely separate discussion. So let's, I guess, leave that and stay to where we are.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point. I mean, what's his role now? Did he come in and supersede these groups?
Yeah, well, that's a
Because
discussion that I think we should have, but not for this podcast. We should perhaps get
focus
together
on,
another
yeah.
podcast to talk about that, because I know that you're you have a lot of information on that particular
Yeah,
issue and timeline. Okay,
yeah. Like the Rothschilds are, obviously later involved with the Bank of England, but
that's right.
like I say in this article, the Bank of England is actually, founded by members of the Merchant Tailors Company, which is one of the city guilds, right?
Right. Okay.
Livery companies.
Yeah.
So it's actually founded by them, by again, these livery companies. And all the stockholders of the Bank of England, the original stockholders were members of these city livery companies. So whatever happened later, I'm not certain because they could have sold, their sharings to their, like you said, these other bankers come onto the scene,
Sure.
Rothschilds or whatever, they could have
Yeah.
sold shares to them later.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
originally it was these guys.
Thanks for the explanation.
And we need to understand that anything that the monarch wants to, okay, for instance, they want to go and have a war with France, for instance. Who's
Mm.
financing that? Before the Rothschilds gets onto the scene, it's these people.
Right.
The monarch, the king, the queen will turn to these people. These people were the private bankers for the kings and queens of England. So they hold the purse strings at that point in
Okay.
history.
Okay.
And again, if they're funding and creating these exploration and trade organizations like the East India Company, the Virginia Company, the Levant Company, which was trading in the Middle East in that
Mm,
area there,
mm,
right?
mm.
This is the beginnings of what evolves into globalism, right? These corporations, mega corporations. Okay.
Mm.
So, your today's BlackRock and that, right?
Sure.
They're based off, these earlier companies, the East India Company, the Dutch East India Company. So these people are the ones that create these corporations that would evolve to the modern, what we understand today as the modern global corporations that dominate, the world. It's important to understand that the mindset of these people that create beginnings of globalism as we know it today. And where are we heading with that? Who knows? But
When you
um,
refer to globalism, you're obviously
yeah, I mean,
talking
like
about
when
things
does
like the
this? Yeah,
New World Order and
it starts from here. I mean, you can
Mm.
see that. That's why if you read the article, you can see where it's heading. And then again, I even talk about that in another article aboard the citizenship. Where I touch on again the Dutch East India Company and BlackRock's Vanguard, State Street, all the big investment firms.
of course.
What I'm trying to illustrate is that this is the beginnings of all that would later become the companies that dominate the economic state of the world, basically.
Okay, so can I perhaps bring up a something that I found quite interesting reading your article? And I didn't know this, having been to London so many times, that there's a statue of George Washington in Trafalgar Square.
Yeah, in the area which makes up the city of London.
Right. So
Yeah.
based on what you've just discussed, this is all now starting to make sense.
What does that say about the city of London? They're showing respects to the person who took England away from King George.
Right.
It's like why would they do that? I mean, if the city of London are part of the British Empire and were working for King George, why would they venerate George Washington? You
Mm,
know,
mm.
so yeah, I found that strange when I came across that. So I put it in there just to show that it adds weight to the theory that the American Revolution was actually instigated by this City of London group to take it away from the King of England. So yeah, and that would make sense that they would put a statue of George Washington to say, hey, he was one of us. He was working for us.
Mm.
He helped us gain England, America.
Yeah.
And, the equivalent of that would be Americans placing a statue of King George in Independence Hall. They would go bonkers. That would
Wow.
they would not do
Okay.
that.
That is a great analogy. Yeah, they would go absolutely crazy if that was even suggested.
Exactly. So, why, and you see this in the City of London with other, don't they have a statue of Karl Marx in London as well?
Yeah, they
Um,
also have an obelisk, an Egyptian obelisk But again, make of that what you will. No, seriously, they do. They have an
Yeah,
Egyptian obelisk and also an Egyptian statue of, it's not the Sphinx, but it's similar to the Sphinx, which I've actually walked past and I've looked at it and gone, okay, well, that's kind of strange, but and then forgotten about doing any research about it. But
yeah. Well, there's one the obelisks in Rome in the Vatican, right?
yeah,
And there's one in Washington D.C.
that's
So
right.
uh,
That's right. We
you
can
know,
talk about the
but,
many
people
behind the
say that's all
obelisk.
Freemasonic, and but
Well,
what people have to understand is a lot of the systems and religions that were adopted in the West have their origins in Egypt,
mm,
right? So that's what that is signifying. And not only Egypt, they even go further back, and there's
Samaria,
exactly Sumer. I was going to say to, and people even say further back to the east, which they can point to India, but that's another topic. But
mm,
the Egyptian connection is probably in reference to that connection from the east to the west,
mm,
and the ruling class and these people who the elites, let's just for want of a better term,
sure.
trace their lineage back to the East. So
Mm,
that is why there is that connection that they've come from the East to establish the West. So that's what they're showing there. They're showing you the connection, and Venice is fascinating in this regards too, because walking through Venice, you can see the Eastern influence there, the architecture, and
okay.
it really is a strong connection. They're coming from the East. Where are they going? Venice shows a lot of that they went there first. And again, you see London almost as adopting a lot of the Venetian customs as
Mm,
well.
mm,
So these City of London livery companies have parades, right?
mm,
And they have ceremonies and parades. And when I looked into them, a lot of them were copied or are very similar to ones that the Venetians had with the Doge of Venice and the families surrounded there. And there is a theory that before the collapse of Venice, a lot of the wealthy merchant families there moved to England. So there could be something in that. They probably moved and probably set up or infiltrated these groups here, the City of London groups.
So are you talking about the
Companies.
Venetian families that
Yeah, the
founded
merchant
Venice?
families.
The merchant families that founded, I think they're called the apostolic families or
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities between like I said, the functions and ceremonies, the way they do business, the way
sure.
they.
Are you talking about Venice in particular here?
No, I'm
Right.
talking
Okay.
about the City of London. A lot of
Oh,
the things
okay.
they do are very similar to what was going on in Venice. And
Right. Okay.
also like MI6 and the establishment of the Secret Service in England
Mm,
or London are very similar to what was going on in Venice. They had something similar there. They had one of the earliest secret services, or what the CIA today was modeled on, was established in Venice.
okay. Well,
Yeah, going off topic there, but
no, it's going off topic, but it's interesting. Do you talk about that in any of your articles?
not on the Secret Service part, but maybe
Right.
maybe that can be a future. That's a future article there.
Right. So, with regard to tying the last two article or the last two podcasts, particularly this one and the Pilgrim Society, what would be the overall takeaway that you're trying to convey here? Is it showing the true relationship of the City of London and the Crown, or the City of London and the US? What would be your primary takeaway?
Okay, so the motive for writing the Pilgrims is first of all, it was a secret society that not many people had heard about. Okay,
Mm,
but people were familiar with the members of the Pilgrim Society. A lot of the members were people that we know. JP Morgan, Jacob Schiff,
Right.
Andrew Carnegie,
Yeah.
Bill
Yeah.
Gates, Warren Buffett, George Soros, Henry Kissinger,
All the big money men. Yeah.
the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Warburg. Like people know those names, right?
Mm, mm,
But what
mm,
they didn't know is that they were and are part of the Pilgrim Society, secret society, right?
mm, mm.
So that brings it up to right up until today, what's going on today. And people like George Soros is very influential on the global stage.
Of course.
Um, he's behind a lot of the immigration and,
That's right.
you know, yeah, right. So the point was to, all right, well, who are these people working for? And I came up, it brought up the Pilgrim Society. And then, okay, were they based? Okay, so they've got two arms, one in America and one in England or the City
Mm,
of London. Why? Because I see America and the City of London group as the global empire of today, right? They're the global empire. So they're running the show. Okay, so it was established in the City of London. So I go back there. Okay, so now who's behind the City of London? Why is it established in the City of London Corporation? So looking behind that brought me to these, City of London livery companies. So
mm,
they are the ones behind the Pilgrim Society. They're the ones who established all these arms of the British Empire, the Secret Services, the Bank of England, and I also found that these livery companies, when you look into them, are behind so many things. They're behind the first printing press in England. They're the ones who started printing all the first books in English,
mm.
which I've written about in another article. Merchant's Tongue, it's
Yes,
called.
that's right.
So they're behind the English language, the development of the English language, bringing it to its modern form, right, from Old English. And again, the purpose of that was to cast spellings on us, right? So then to me, it was showing a connection with maritime law and the connection with, the maritime language that English has adopted,
Mm,
when we I've written about this before and it's in my book, which I'll go into great detail about that, about the
mm,
English language
mm.
and how it's a water-based language. That was all created by these people, the same group, the same livery companies. So you got to understand everything to do with English, England, the British Empire, America, the American Empire, which has now morphed into globalism, all begins with these groups, these guilds and livery companies. Okay.
Okay.
So now, do I go further back and start looking into who set these people up?
Right.
But like I said, there is a connection to the Roman Empire, and I have written about these guilds in another article actually that traces them back to Florence. It's one of my earlier ones called Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, and that also talks about these guilds, but not the city, not the English version. I'm talking about the Italian ones, and these
Right.
English-based livery companies, guilds, are actually modeled off these ones in from Florence. So it goes back there as well.
Well, you
Okay.
do mention in your article, which our audience can read or subscribe to at substack.com/Phoenician Hunter. There are 111 livery companies in total, and you've basically given a screenshot of the 12 highest ranked companies, which you say that they remain known as the Great 12 City Livery Companies, which I found
Yeah,
quite
because they
interesting.
hold the majority votes. They hold the power. So that's why they're called the 12th great, you
Yeah,
know.
so as you opened in this discussion at the very start of this podcast, you mentioned grocers, drapers, fishmongers, goldsmiths, etc. And it's
Yeah.
interesting to see that each of them has an emblem, a coat of arms, let's call it. But again, if you dive into this rabbit hole deep enough, you'll certainly find out a lot more, which you've
Yeah.
obviously gone into. So,
I want
so
to point out something too
yes,
that
please, please.
my articles are all connected. There's a theme running through all of them. The way I see the world and the way it's run, and this is evident by the way you look, if you just step back and look at the way the world is run, it's a business. The world is run like a business, right? Like a
Absolutely.
corporation. We
Absolutely.
live in a material realm where, that's what they're constantly pushing, just for you to consume and
Mm,
and consume and consume. So what kind of mindset would set up a world in that way? And
mm.
the mindset is a merchant would.
Of
Someone
course.
who's interested in money would create the world in that image, right? So they've created the world in their image, which is money. So if you want to know who runs the world, you're going to look at a merchant because they're the ones who set it up because
Of
it's
course.
it's created in their image, right? So that's where you're going to go.
Mm.
So that's what I've done, and that's what my whole Substack is about. Trying to find who these people are, why they set it up like that. Find the evidence. Have everything referenced. So it's not just me saying these things. That's why I go for a lot of pain to read a lot of books and to reference them. As anyone who's read my articles has noticed, that they're all referenced at the bottom, or I put footnotes and everything.
Of course.
And I'm thankful for all the people who have subscribed and paid subscribers, because it gives me motivation to keep going, because it shows that people are interested. And I do get some criticism that I don't post enough, maybe based on other writers who are writing 2-3 times a week. But I can guarantee you that, first of all, these people are doing it full time. I don't have that luxury. So if people who don't know, I have a full-time job. I do this outside of hours.
This is what makes these articles special to me in particular, who, again, I read a lot and I like to read quality articles. This is what makes it special, is that because this is not your full-time job, and when you do this, you actually dive so deep that you research so well that you basically bring several texts together in one article. And that's what fascinated me. And this is why we decided to do this podcast series, to let people know that this is quality research, this is quality written material, and to save people the time of going out and reading text after text. At least this gives, this whets their appetite to research some more. So I think they're very well researched and written articles.
Thank you. Yeah, and you brought up an interesting point that I could never write 2-3 articles a week because, as I'm reading 2 or 3 books per article. Most people who write articles, they're giving you opinion pieces. I
That's
can give
right.
you that too. And
That's
I
right.
can I can give you 2-3 opinion pieces a week, no problem.
Mm.
But there's no depth to it. There's no substance. Like you can't go and cross-check it yourself. So these take time. I would love for this to be my full-time gig, and I could push out a lot more. Yeah, definitely. And there's so many other areas that I would love to explore, and I just don't have the time. Unfortunately, like I said, I still need to earn a living. This is slowly building, which I'm, grateful for. I just wanted to address some of the feedback that I receive and some of the criticism. Really, that is the criticism, that I'm not producing enough. And it's not something like, you're producing crap,
Mm.
So it's actually, it's fair criticism. But like I said, it's not something I can fix right now. I can't address that because like I still need to earn a living. And
I think that
uh,
that feedback is complimentary, if anything. So I encourage, again, I'll say this as I've said previously, I encourage people to visit your Substack channel at substack.com/Phoenician Hunter. I encourage people to subscribe because, again, even though you do offer some free articles, without getting the full picture, as you said before, there's a timeline of events that you research and write these articles to tell a story, and we are here today doing this podcast, as we have done with previous podcasts, to inform people about, what is happening and how things came to be, without having any conspiracy theories or anecdotal evidence. This is all well researched. So I would say that the feedback that you've received is complimentary because people are wanting more.
yeah, I mean that's the way I saw it as well. Yeah, and I just wanted to say, yeah, your support is appreciated, and it drives me, because if I wasn't getting it in anything like that, I would probably have given up a long time ago.
Well, please continue. As again, as we come to the close of yet another, again, I find these discussions insightful, enlightening. It always draws me back to read previous articles that you've written. But before we do sign off, is there anything you want to say, as I said earlier, to bring the Hidden Hand and the Pilgrim Society back? Is there just a statement that you want to make as to what people should basically take away and what they should do from here?
I would want to say this is that a lot of what I write about is part of a bigger picture. And I mentioned this before, that you need to really go back to the beginning and start with my first article. If you want to get the bigger picture of what's going on, who's behind it, how it evolved to this point, go back. And people who subscribe, become paid subscribers, might just read one or two of the more recent articles and not go back to the earlier ones. And they're missing a huge chunk of the story. Okay, and an important piece. So I encourage those who become members to go. There's a lot there now. I think I'm up to, I don't know, 36, 38 articles now. So there's a lot there that are presenting this bigger picture. So go back and delve into them.
Well, as always, thank you again for sharing your thoughts and for making public, the articles that you've spent so much time researching. Thanks again for your insights, for the discussion, and I look forward to our next podcast, which will be airing very soon.
Likewise. Thanks.
Okay, stay well.